high power electric plasma thrusters for satellites and spacecraft. So what we really do at Magdrive that separates us out is that by using a metal propellant and by ionizing it into a plasma, accelerating that plasma with magnetic fields allows us to produce a system which is very low in mass with the same high efficiency or specific impulse that you'd see with a Hall effect thruster, but with 100 times the effective thrust. This capability translates into being able to do repeated close proximity operations to make that kind of economic model possible and long-term viable. It allows us to do large-scale constellation management and much faster and much more economical replenishing. And it also allows us to do stochastic movement to make defense and military-grade satellites untraceable by enabling a sort of bee-like wiggle dance in the first couple of weeks to make future movements untraceable. The other added real part of this is being able to address the congestion in low Earth orbit and enabling satellites to perform the avoidance maneuvers, which are going to go from being a twice-yearly event to being something twice monthly, maybe even weekly, let alone the additional deorbiting times, which have gone from 25 years to 5 years, all of which consumes a huge amount of delta V for the satellite, a huge amount of lifetime that needs to be spent in these operations. And this is where the Magdrive is positioning itself very much within the industry there. Magdrive today has grown from a team of 2, just me and my co-founder, founded in September 2019 to a team of 11 with defined electronics, which includes power electronics and embedded systems, a mechanical team with systems, flight operations, and propellant feed engineers, an experimental team focusing on numerical and plasma physics simulations, as well as a growing operational staff as well, focusing on general upkeep, but also marketing. We had our first flight called Operation Get It Up, which went up on Transporter 6 on January 2nd. This is a demonstration of that full power system, because the Magdrive achieves that very high temperature and very high density plasma by inputting up to 2 kilowatts of power. Anyone who knows anything about satellites will know that LEO satellites aren't running around with 2 kilowatts of power. So what we do is we draw power in from the solar panels, we store it up internally in capacitors, and then discharge it really rapidly at very high and variable power levels in order to ionize that metal. And Operation Get It Up is a demonstration of that full power chain, showing that we can integrate with a third-party satellite and actually have our hardware in space. Our latest prototype, TRL-6, working in the vacuum chamber at our lab, called So Much for Subtlety, has given us our first thrust measurements and has given us essentially a view into what our first real minimum viable product would be, and has allowed us to accelerate our timelines, which sounds like nothing to you guys and sounds boring as hell, but to us guys is actually very exciting. On a commercial sense, we're collaborating with future customers, Astroscale, Deorbit, Endurosat, Rolls-Royce, and Thales Alenia in many different areas of commercial, business development, and technical development as well. So the first thing I want to cover is a slide I've called How I Learned to Stop Worrying and of the Total Lack of a Career Path. Because I often get asked how I got into the space industry, and the answer I usually give is I just founded a company. And that sounds flippant as fuck, but I have a point to make. So I started off studying classics because my physics teachers put me off doing astrophysics. And I wanted to work in museums, I wanted to dig up archaeological sites, and I was struck by the decisions that people over 2,000 years ago made and how we're still living with their decisions, which gave me a sense of purpose that I needed to do something more future related. I went back to university. I studied at the Open University in the UK, which is a sort of at your leisure distance university. So I got to work at the same time and pay off monthly tuition fees. But I moved deliberately into maths and mechanical engineering so that I could do an MSc in neurotechnology and biomedical engineering. From there, I moved into using AI for personalized healthcare, and from there into edge AI for robotics and autonomous systems. I do not have a background in the space industry. And the reason I bring that up and say it is to not stress the path that you go on to get into the space industry. And I'm not alone here either. Filling that path with experience, with skills, being able to think outside the box are skills that leads you to be not just a startup founder, but the kind of person that can work in a startup as well. Within the Magdrive team, which is currently 11 people, only 2 of us have ever worked in space before. Magdrive's current embedded systems engineer, George Addison, and our systems and flight engineer, Charlie Clark. Previously the Satellite Applications Catapult, Lockheed Martin, they've really seen it all. Everyone else comes from the automotive industry. They come from defense. One of Magdrive's mechanical engineers used to build geodesic domes for festivals and basically created our entire plasma injector. And I'm going to come on to the team aspect of this and more, but this is really important to highlight. And the reason it's really important to highlight is because one of the things you see very commonly with early stage startup founders, especially those doing it their first time round, is a heavy dose of imposter syndrome. And that it's really important to have a different view of this and what it is. The thing about so-called imposters is that they have unsustainably high standards for everything they do. And there's a line of thinking that undercuts everything, and at the heart of it is to say that if I don't know everything, then I know nothing. And if it's not absolutely perfect, then it's deficient. Imposter syndrome isn't something you need to get rid of. It can actually be very useful. It can be extremely useful to you if you identify it as a useful mental exercise where you want to fill in gaps for yourself and just be hungry to do so. You don't have to kill your imposter syndrome, you just need to use it. Imposter syndrome is like a fire. You can warm your hands on it, or you can burn your house down with it. With that comes kind of the idea that if you really want to, you can take it in steps. Compare yourself to your old self. See how much you've learned now compared to 6 months ago. When you're in the mindset in the middle of doing a startup, it's very difficult to find milestones at which to look back at yourself and find out where those real moments are. So rely on the team you've built. Rely on your co-founder. Ask directly. Because if you're anything like me, then you suck at self-reflection and you suck at finding milestones to use as those anchoring moments for yourself. That's a kind of something I'll highlight actually about the co-founder. People talk about how important it is to find that co-founder, and it's really true. And when it comes to the startup itself, there's nothing that you keep from your co-founder. I've been able to go to Tom, my co-founder, Magdrive CTO, and say very bluntly, what am I like compared to 6 months ago? And Tom can be a really good judge of that because he was there right at the start. So becoming really busy is important. Taking every opportunity that you can to fill in those gaps is really important. And realize that no, you don't know everything, and that that's absolutely fine. And bear in mind that every supposed adult in the room that you ever talk to is also flying by the seat of their pants and is probably thinking exactly the same that you do. If you really need something else to fill in the gaps, then consider what I've discovered to be called brilliant con man syndrome. Did you deserve anything that's come your way? Maybe not. Are you going to grab every single shred of it? Yes, absolutely. Are you a horrible goblin who can't paint at all, but these people happen to love what you're painting? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Look at you going and talking to all these people. Are you qualified to do this task? Probably not. But is anyone stopping you? No. Maybe you do or don't have the certificates to prove that you can do this. Who knows? Somebody out there did. Who gave them the power to give you those certificates? No idea. Someone thought you were just good enough to go get them. So you are so good at cheating, you don't have to break any rules to do it. That pretty much changed my entire mind on imposter syndrome, and I hope it has for you as well. Which leads me into the first days at this startup and kind of what that really looks like. First thing to say here is there's no bad time to start. Magdrive was founded in September 2019. March 2020, the entire world went into lockdown. And Tom and I separated out our competencies. What we were building was a highly electronic product at the time. So Tom went off and built our earliest prototype. He detonated our first plasma in his daughter's bedroom because he's basically Iron Man. And he's like ridiculously smart. So there's no reason why being stuck in your house means that you can't demonstrate your core capability. There's no reason why you can't find that core competency that makes your entire product work and then go and demonstrate it, build it in any capacity at all. That first prototype that Magdrive built, called Fate Amenable to Change, was, well, it sucked. It sucked. The components we were using were very poorly and hastily soldered. I'm a mechanical engineer. Soldering is not something I've done since I was like 17 years old. I did a very sloppy job. But did it shunt enough power into some random bit of metal and detonate it and create a massive spark? Absolutely. Were people impressed? Oh my God, you bet. People's faces just lit up when you told them we just detonated a plasma in front of them. And Tom still tells me that it's nothing and that he was doing it when he was like 15, which I know is true. The next part of those first days of your startup is meeting everyone as much as you possibly can. This is a very supportive industry to be in, and everyone is absolutely psyched about everyone's success, which is a very different space to be in for the industry compared to mining or medical science, anything with a very heavy academic component to it. Academia gets really competitive, and when that seeps into the commercial landscape, you get those rivalries which start to find biases. Space doesn't have that yet, and so it makes it a fantastic place where people are just willing to help each other out. And even in Magdrive's case, we owe a lot to people who saw a lot in us and put a lot of trust in us very early on. In some cases, more that was warranted. But that all builds up. Becoming a social butterfly means being able to read the room that you're in. That's all it really means. It means being able to present your idea in a concrete way to entirely new people, but it means understanding what they want to see from you. Some people you talk to are going to be very clearly technologically focused, and they're going to have deep reservations about it, so being more open about your technology is a great way to go. Bear in mind here that your IP at this very early stage, don't worry about it. It is not to be concerned about. No one's going to steal your idea. You could email your entire idea in a very easy to unzip zip folder to your biggest prime competitor, and it will sit in an email folder for about 10 years until someone even looks at it. And it'll take them another 10 years to open it up and understand what the hell you were talking about, and another 10 years to find the funding to actually put it into any workable practice anyway. So in the early days, apart from building your IP and trying to say what that looks like, you can be open about your idea. The more you give early advisors and find those people, the more you'll get in return, particularly accelerators, particularly with national space agencies that you get close to and going to every event you can to talk to these people. The other aspect about being a social butterfly, though, and when I say reading the room, is that you also have to play a game a bit. People really like it when you take their advice on board. And you will have a different presentation for every person that you meet or have a call with. You'll realize when you can relax. Going through accelerators is actually kind of interesting because, to give you a concrete example, Magdrive went through the Entrepreneur First Accelerator. Entrepreneur First is basically an accelerator where they take a load of people and then they put them in a bag, they shake that bag up and they just pour out startups and see which ones survive. Me and Tom had already founded Magdrive when we went in, and the difference there for us really was the realizing we already felt like a company going in. There's 2 interviews beforehand, and then suddenly you're in the accelerator. What we realized early on, I think, is that whole 3-month accelerator was an interview all by itself. You can tell that people don't take that seriously or they don't know it because they start forming their own Slack channels where they just talk shit about the accelerator. Excuse me. And guess whose startups didn't make it past the investment committee? People who start their own Slack channels and talk shit. Slack is basically Discord, except someone has admin privileges and god-level control and can see all your DMs. Anyway, building the company you want to work at. This is probably the most important thing about those first days that you put together. This is really where you get to have fun. This is really where you create the company and create the team that you want to work with. This is something I'm going to go into a lot more depth in the next couple of slides. But this means, in our case, in the case of Magdrive, having a very horizontal company. The individual engineers get a huge amount of agency. It means that there's beers in the fridge, that we trust each other, that we slap a stupid name on anything. We have a components heat oven flow called Heston Bloomberg. Everything in the lab basically has a sticker on it as a name for something. It means that every time I go into the lab, someone has messed with my desk, or that someone's raised the desk height and stolen the keys. It means building a mountain of Coke cans on Tom's desk that nearly reaches the ceiling. Stuff like this. You can't take yourself too seriously with this. You've got to have fun with it because you are going to be doing this for at least 5 years. So you cannot afford to be so serious that you can't just have fun and mess with each other. Now, this does depend exactly what kind of team you're building, but we're going to go into this in a little more detail. The final point here in these first days is that, certainly in our case, and I think what's really paid off, is that we do everything all the time, 100% with all the effort we can. Because in those early days, you have absolutely no idea what will bring the biggest return. It means doing 12, 13, 14-hour days, literally every day of the week. That's how me and Tom spent the first 3 months of Magdrive. And eventually we decided maybe we should take the second Sunday off. Every second Sunday we'd take off. That eventually became taking weekends off. What I mean by doing everything 100% of the time, I mean going to every event you can, making and writing every single application you can. In my case, they're getting a crash course in plasma physics so I can understand and be up at Tom's level, even if those moments of lucidity come to me for about 3 minutes and I have a great conversation and then it completely leaves my head, because I don't have a PhD in that stuff. Embedded systems, for example. Do I remember it now? No. Did it help me hire the right people and make an informed decision at the time? Yes. And did it all contribute to Magdrive becoming what it is today? Absolutely. I can't give you guidance on exactly when you can drop that kind of attitude. It comes naturally. The important thing to remember here is that a startup is a marathon, not a sprint, and you are at risk of burning yourself out. And you will only realize that you've burnt yourself out once your life feels like it's in ruins and your personal and mental health is in tatters around you, which you don't want to get to. So worth checking in with your co-founder, check in with friends, don't forget your personal life. These people are a barometer for the person you were before you started this and the kind of person you should be as you keep building it. Quick word on funding, I suppose. It's going to be a quick word because talking about funding could literally take an entire 2 hours by itself. Grants are fantastic. It allows you to build collaborations with future customers and with national space agencies. It gives you a huge amount of press. It's a great way to work up to larger and larger grants. You aren't going to be able to walk into a multi-million-dollar euro or sterling grant without having demonstrated that you're a good custodian of someone else's national money first. The problem with grants, of course, is they don't supply you with an adequate cash flow. You do not get the opportunity to build a long-term plan here. You don't get the opportunity to hire somebody and keep them. Not without more money. Reporting is a big thing. Some grant sources are unbelievably bureaucratic, and it takes a hell of a lot of time up. Also, you need to make sure that the grant work that you're doing is part of your critical path of technological development that you've already got planned out. Otherwise, it's very easy to end up in a situation where everyone on the team is working really hard, and then you look back and realize that you haven't actually advanced your actual business by 2 years or something like that. The way to complement that is with VC funding. Money up front, it allows you to create a long-term plan and a strategy and a vision. It gives you huge insights into how larger companies operate. VCs, especially in the space industry, are in a great position to give you very specific advice and focus on how to scale your business and your company. Obviously, the downside of this is that you need a fundraising strategy. You need to come to grips with and understand ideas around equity, VC relations, what all the terms in that term sheet mean. But the sweetest of sweet spots is bringing the grants and the VC funding together. Happy to go into more detail in this if people have specific questions when we get to the question part. But for now, that's kind of all I want to say on funding without going really into depth. So the first part that I really want to get into the meat of really is the team that you build. The team you build is the company you build, and not the plan you build is the company you build. Because there will be no one who understands more about the technology than the people you've brought in right now. And the Magdrive team is a really good example of how me and Tom have built this out quite deliberately, and then takes on a life of its own. So we have a very horizontal structure at Magdrive. And by horizontal, I mean that individual engineers have a huge amount of agency. They get to make the decisions about the design. We're all working to the same metrics, what capabilities we want this next Magdrive prototype to achieve, but how we get there is up to those engineers. And we have to trust them with that. That's why they're part of this founding technical team. The flip side of that is that they have to own their own failures. It means internalizing and recognizing those failures, learning from it, and moving right on. Someone who can't do that maybe isn't suited for a startup kind of lifestyle, kind of startup mentality. And it's that kind of flexible team that can bring in a lot of different experiences and skills. So, for example, some of the times that we've really been able to advance ideas around the plasma injector needs inputs from mechanical, electrical, but our numerical physicists as well have been able to jump in and help with that and give us insights about the way super hot, super dense plasma interacts with different metals and what to bear in mind when you're building that kind of system. The other aspect of a horizontal company with the kind of form that we have is that we have a lot of remote working. If someone knows that they're going to be working from home, doing CAD work and documentation all day, excuse me, there is absolutely no reason for them to come into the lab. They can just stay at home and work in the comfort of their own house. That's entirely flexible and up to them. The teams are very good at just managing that themselves. The other part of this team that we're building is that, and something we're very open with the team about, again, that massive level of transparency cannot be overstated, is that this is the last job any of them should ever have. Because no one will ever know more about the Magdrive than the first 10 people we bring on board. That means shares. It means being a shareholder in Magdrive, really being some of the first shareholders in Magdrive. In the future, I would like to see the first 10 members of the team being represented with a board seat, for example. In future, no doubt, some of them will become heads of departments. Some of them might well leave Magdrive with their shares and go on to have insane careers outside of Magdrive as well. But there'll always be this very strong technical team at the heart of what we do, and it'll be based a lot more than on just having worked together. It'll be based on, it's going to sound corny, it's going to sound rubbish, but like being friends. The power of friendship is what I'm saying. Like, one of the big things we realized when we started hiring was, can we go for a drink with this person? And if we can't go for a drink with that person, it means we can't be totally honest. We can't hang out afterwards. We can't get to know that person in a non-professional capacity, which is really, really important. Something we would ask people really early on is, have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons before? And if they said yes, then it was like, okay, great, we're going to get on with this person. If they said no, but my friends have, or no, but I'm willing to give it a go, then fantastic. Because you can't simultaneously treat your team as your friends and cattle. You need to choose. Startups that do that, honestly, startups that I've worked at do that, and things fall apart before work even gets done. In fact, one of our engineers, Charlie, that I mentioned earlier, even before I could ask him about whether he liked D&D or not, saw that I had some maps and a sword in my background, and he asked me if I liked playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we basically hired him on the spot. As far as building that team goes, get ready to spend time on it, like a lot of time on it. Because actually building the team means going out and talking to people, and it means raising the brand awareness of your startup considerably. And I would really encourage any startup entrepreneur to be very willing to talk very publicly about the startup. And it's something Magdrive should have done sooner than we did. It can be a lot like making a movie. You have a concept, you want to storyboard it, you want to film it, then release it to the public in a final produced state, say. And during that process, you should take some time out to actually make a trailer. This is something that's 1.5 minutes long, 2 minutes long max, but that video, that trailer tells your story. It doesn't have to have every little detail in there, but more than going into the exact capabilities of what your technology does, it's to get people interested. It tells your story, describes your vision, and it also helps people to really understand what the flavor of your company is, what the culture's like. Are you a team of industry veterans? Are you two guys who have never worked in the space industry before, but you know what you're doing in your own respective areas? So that kind of thing is a really important part to get into. And frankly, it's kind of like sales. You're selling to these candidates. You're managing that pipeline and becoming known in the industry in almost every way you can, by going to conferences, by being that social butterfly, has a massively beneficial effect on almost every area of your operation. In knowing your near-term priorities, these are all the things you want to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months, right at the start. And you want to rank them by the things you know how to do the least, actually, from most to least. It sounds counterintuitive, but you actually want to hire people to do what you know best first. You're able to assess that candidate's fit a lot better and make them productive on day one. The reason for that really is, and we'll go into this again in more detail as we go through, everything comes back in on itself, I promise, is that because you're going to be looking for potential rather than experience, you're looking for someone who can take that role over. And this is something where I actually had to realize this myself, having been the mechanical engineer, having to step more into that CEO role and realize that actually there are mechanical engineers who are a lot better than the mechanical engineer that I can be. Also knowing that I'd be damned if I was going to let someone else be the CEO of my startup. So no, we knew we had to hire mechanical engineers. How do you find these people? First off, you go crawling your personal network for all your smartest friends. And you talk to them. You look for potential, but not experience. Excitement is great, but you need to go a lot further. You need to go out and meet that A-plus talent so you know what to look for when you're interviewing. Go through those, if you can, through your extended network of people. If you can get up to 50 people you're talking to, that's great. It's the most talented, most high potential friends you can think of, classmates, former colleagues. Just give them a call. Tell them about your startup. Be really excited. Tell them what you're hiring for. Try to convince them to join. Straight up, just try and convince them to join. Because you can't just wait for people that are looking for the next thing to find your startup and come to you. You've got to convince them to probably leave what they're currently doing. But for each person that you meet, you can ask them if they know someone else who'd be interested and continue to work through that second-degree connections from your network. Check back in with people. If they say they were going to talk to somebody, check back in. This is something you're going to do a lot, actually, checking back in with people. And as a startup founder, you do end up working really long days, and it does a weird thing to your perception of time, where you feel like you've done a year's worth of work in a week, and you're infuriated that someone hasn't replied to your email within 2 days. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't chase them up. So this will all yield probably your first 1 or 2 hires, realistically speaking. And if you can go higher than that, fantastic. If you're hiring your friends, then you have the opportunity to aim for the smartest people regardless of that clear fit. Roles in a startup at this very early stage tend to be very fluid early on, and you need to be flexible or find flexible people who can get things done at an abnormal rate. And yeah, look outside the industry. Our Magdrive's 3 plasma physicists never worked in space. As I said, they come in from automotive, from defense, really all kind of areas. Now, the caveat here, of course, is your mileage may vary. We, for example, really stretch to get those 50 conversations. And in a lot of cases, you just won't. In that case, I would really recommend looking into those competitor companies that you've identified as you start looking at the market. There'll be later stage successful startups, similar businesses to yours. And these companies will have high potential candidates with experience that face challenges and opportunities that are relevant to you. So go looking for those people. You can reach out to them. Look for people who've been there for about a year or 2, maybe on a more junior side. People who clearly have a sort of upward trajectory. Really just follow people on LinkedIn. See if they've jumped from one relatively similar role to another. Have they been climbing and showing progression? And you want to find the latter, the people who've been climbing and showing that progression. What exactly does talent look like? It's something I really wish I could have answered for myself about 2 years ago. You want to find risk takers and avoid people who are comfortable going down a very trodden path and climbing a nice steady ladder. You want to find people who can see that there's no ladder there and want to make their own. It means being self-taught. It means people who jumped ship when they were in an environment that they didn't like and they said, no, I want to go do something and do it for myself. They continued to build themselves up. They continued to educate them. It means people who moved countries to take up a whole new job or an entirely new university position. Being an early employee means you encounter so many obstacles, and you need to look for people who are willing to run through walls, learn whatever they need to learn. And one dimension of these candidates is you need to assess their willingness to get their hands dirty, in areas that they don't necessarily understand. Alongside that is understanding really what makes someone tick and build that up with them. In those cases, when you find that person who's willing to take risks, who can see what you're working on and gets excited, that's when you know it. When we started interviewing people for the Magdrive, we were in we had a lab through a European Space Agency Business Incubation Center that was about 3 meters by 2 meters big. It was riddled with asbestos. It was the middle of winter. There was no central heating, and yet somehow 3 guys joined us. And the first guy to join us did was look at our printed circuit board schematics and tell us why they were wrong. We're like, yeah, this guy's gonna one day be the head of electronic engineering at Magdrive. It turns out that is exactly what he wants. He basically leads the engineering team, but you didn't hear that from me. The other guys would be really annoyed to hear that. It's just his false personality, frankly. Coming up to acting like a startup every single chance you get, which is something which sometimes you see startups kind of miss out of the opportunity from. What I mean by this is really selling that vision. There are so many opportunities out there for so many young engineers. Some of them like graduate programs. And the reason it's easy to like graduate programs is because that career progression is very straightforward and obvious. And that doesn't mean that people who go to graduate programs wouldn't work well in a startup. It means that startups generally suck about advertising their opportunities and outlaying a roadmap of where you can be in the next 5-10 years. And that is really important. You can have a vague plan of where you want to be in 5-10 years' time, and you need to convey that when you talk to that person. So go large. Talk about the big end goal vision for your company and place it in front of that person. Put them in it. Because if you can't sell it to someone you really want to join your team, you won't sell it to anyone. You won't sell it to investors. You won't sell it to future customers. So what we did was we brought up the entire culture we wanted to build. The horizontal nature of it, the real amount of agency, the flexibility, making sure their decisions matter, the transparency. Do they want to work on cool stuff? Do they want to learn everything? Do they want to become a go-to specialist, traveling across all your different facilities over the next 5 years? Do they want to be the wolf, just going from one place to the next, solving problems? The flip side to that is that you get to help these people. You get to be a lot more flexible than a really big company. And by that, I mean you can really accommodate people who are coming to startups for a different way of working. So just flex that. You can come back with an offer fast, really fast. You can discuss salaries really quickly. You can iterate on the entire offer, jump on a call to talk about it. You can help with relocation costs or a home setup, or you can push back a start date, or you can bring it forwards if that's what they want. That first guy to join Magdrive, who looked at our PCB layouts and went, no, that's wrong, and basically helped us improve efficiency massively just because he was really good at it, initially had a little holiday planned, and then lockdown happened, couldn't go anywhere, wanted to join a week early. Absolutely, why not? Now he's on board. Maintain that team culture, also really important. The best way to attract that A+ talent is to hire A+ talent and expect A+ output from them. A really strong culture, whatever it is, fails really fast and falls apart if the A+ people in the company see that the C-level people, the founders, are not holding everyone to the same standard. We had to fire somebody. They were holding the team back, and in hindsight, we should have let that person go a lot sooner. Once you get that feeling that someone is, whether it's taking advantage, if that's what you're feeling, if you're feeling that they're not pulling their weight, then of course you need to talk to that person for different reasons. But at the core of it, if everyone's not being held to the same standard, while the same output is expected from everyone, then that's on you to look at as a founder and as one of the leaders. And to do that, you need to live in that sort of 6 to 9 months in the future, so you know what those outputs are going to be. And when you get a bit larger, once you've got those 5-6 people in the team, you need to start identifying those skill gaps. That's when you want to start bringing in a little more experience, with a good dose of potential still. And asking yourself if this is a question of competency versus motivation in the team. Done well, motivation shouldn't be a problem for a team which is hungry to learn and wear many hats. And the skill gaps come about by working with the team and they'll be the ones to inform you of that best. You can have a very open and honest relationship with the team, and they won't mind telling you, hey, I don't know how to do X, or I can learn how to do X, but really that's industry experience going on another 5 years. In that case, you can put together basically a job specification with that team, and therefore keep meeting people in the industry or outside of it. Go to conferences, put yourself in front of the right people, and learn who your competitor companies are and expand that network any way you can, so that in an ideal world, as soon as you've got that job spec, you actually know who to approach and who to send it to, which is massively time saving. Being an effective founder or executive is something which doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, I think. Even though people can be very highly motivated or want to start a startup, it does require for everyone a change in mentality and finding exactly what it is that motivates you in order to do this particular task. So what I want to go into here a little bit is really that change in mindset that happened for me. Learning everything. I mentioned how that kind of crash course in plasma physics went down. Doing a crash course in embedded systems. The most recent one, Magdrive recently moved labs from a relatively small lab to a much larger one. So renting a large commercial property to do light industrial work in the UK is mad. There's so much involved. There are so many legal documents, and I've had to just file that all away in my head as stuff I hope I never see again, but I know I will. But learning how to do that stuff, being on top of it, and pulling in lots of different bits of information is something which led me to being the CEO rather than continuing in a mechanical engineering sense myself anyway. Because I did very much start in that mechanical engineering place. And I became the CEO later, really. Me and Tom didn't have defined ideas about becoming Chief Executive Officer and Chief Technology Officer. To be honest, Chief Executive Officer is just something that people who interact with startups expect to see. Like, I run all the non-technical stuff. That apparently makes me CEO. Cool. Tom really wanted to be CSO, Chief Science Officer, but your startup needs to grow to a certain size or have a certain level of, kudos within its C level before, you start having a CSO. People assume you have a CTO, so fine. Tom wasn't the CSO, he became CTO. Maybe in the future when titles matter less, Tom will get that dream, but he does the same job anyway. And what I really latched onto in moving from mechanical engineering to the CEO and putting down literally all technology work myself is realizing that what I'm good at is strategy. I'm good at pulling in lots of different bits of information, making decisions from it, and putting together a long-term strategy by understanding all the different levers to pull and to what degree I should be pulling them and in what order to make the best outcome possible. Something that I always had in my mind is if I'm talking to a VC or we know that we want to do an in-orbit demonstration and there's the right person to talk to about it, metaphysically speaking, there is an order of words to say to that person to get what you want. That order of words exists to get that funding, to make sure you get that collaboration. And trying to figure out what that order of words are and exactly what it is, turns out that's what I'm kind of good at. I'm good at being the face of stuff. I am not as good a mechanical engineer as the two guys. There's the three guys who are currently in the Magdrive team. I'm not. They are visionary, and I am astounded by the work that they do on an everyday basis. That plasma injector, for example, is a work of art, and I wish I could put it on my wall, but I can't because it's super IP sensitive. But every time we walk through it, my mouth is just open, just drop to the floor. Which kind of leads me to the next point, which once you get to that position of giving technical work over to somebody else to a large degree, or at least speaking from my own experience at Magdrive, is leading and not managing. Being judged as a leader can very much mean how many people you need on your team to achieve your output. Your managerial leverage, if you like, how much you're able to do with as few people as possible. And that has implications for how you should think about hiring people into the team. People should either be individually so productive that they raise the average productivity of your team or act as a multiplier to everyone currently on the team. In either case, you've got to make sure that the overall productivity increases cover the cost of bringing them on. And this kind of thinking prevents leaders from arbitrarily hiring into their team for the sake of building up a little fiefdom, which I've also seen happen, and again has really negative consequences for creating yes men or creating huge communication issues within teams where people are no longer sure what the structure of that company is. You want to add someone to the team? Sure, go ahead. But remember that it raises the bar on the expected total per person. So that kind of output divided by 4 people, A+. Output divided by 6 people, maybe B-. Depends on those people. So the best way to look at that, for me, has been to focus on the inputs. Spend time judging your team's inputs, the quality of the ideas. Not on whether someone can just, increase something by 3-fold this quarter, such as their output. If you manage the inputs, the clarity of thinking, your best people will focus on projects that they have the highest potential upside, that is explainable to you as a leader, even if they're risky and a total flop. But that's why startups don't need such heavily defined objectives and key results. For example, if you were just trying to set your goal to increase your revenue 3 times this year, you'll never lead to the really intelligent people that you brought on to experiment and lead to a 10-fold revenue instead. That's why it's really important these people have their own agency and their own time while you as a leader guide that overall mission. Spending time on high-level activities means doing things that have the most impact. Preparing one thing that affects many people, or like an all-hands meeting, or a dashboard. Or, if your company interacts with the same dashboard and does so every single day, then even the font that they look at is going to be really important. Or you do one thing with a lot of impact for one person, like a performance review. And being both precise and incredibly candid in your feedback to a single individual has a massive long-term effect and is a very high leverage use of your time. You want to optimize that time as, frankly, your most valuable resource that you can as you build that. You're going to start off doing everything, like I said, literally everything, because you have no idea what's going to give you the biggest payoff. You've got no idea. Unless it's your second or third startup. But in that case, you're probably here just to watch me try and explain how I did my first one. But when you come to a point where you need to start literally reviewing exactly how you're going to spend your time, most executives are potentially very reactive to requests for their time and typically let people put meetings wherever they want them on their calendar, which isn't always their fault. Email today has basically become a way to put things on other people's to-do list. Actively managing your calendar and auditing it, categorizing it, is a top 3 priority for the week, and designing your calendar to spend 80% of your time on those priorities. You can leave some leftover time on your calendar to fill those reactive requests, because the team will come to you with these things. And for me, the team is the most important thing I react to. If the team needs something from me, 95% of the time I will drop what I'm doing and focus on helping with the team with what they need. Because it's rare that they come to me with that. Or it certainly becomes rarer as time goes along and they really find their place there. So when you do that, for those reactive requests, is it a top priority? Always wonder if it's on the high leverage activities, and constantly check back in with yourself to make sure you're not slipping back into a reactive mode. Perform those calendar audits on a regular basis/cadence. And it means sitting down, going through the calendar for the past month, looking over how you did it recently, and categorize each event into various priorities, as well as identifying how much of your time you did end up spending on high leverage activities. Different people have different ways of doing this. I personally hate Jira and Trello and Kanban boards. I spent way too much time in my internships giving a shit about whether I move this task along on a Kanban board. And to this day, I keep my to-do list in Microsoft Notepad. And I'm actually really bad at this because once I've done something, I just delete it from the line. And then when it comes to the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I have no idea what I've done today. Absolutely no idea. Apparently, you can just create like a little box with a check mark in it, which has totally changed my life. The follow-on from that, at least in Magdrive, is that I can't tell individual engineers which one to use or how to manage themselves. They know what works for them. and teams in particular choosing how they track their time and how they do that themselves. Another tactic from that kind of manufacturing idea is to batch similar tasks together. it sounds simplistic to say, but say doing all of your one-to-ones back to back on the same day is huge, because for most people, context switching is extremely costly, and it just interrupts you in a way that takes you a lot of time to get back into. The other thing to bear in mind is something I took on board very early on from another space founder, was that you need to reserve time for thinking just for yourself. Reserve a period of time uninterrupted on your calendar where you think deeply about strategy, and you let yourself just think about every aspect of the company, which is also really useful for when you're preparing things that affect many people, such as that all-hands presentation. And as often as you can, do it with a co-founder or loop in a member of the team who you know is already going to be pertinent to what you're going to be thinking about that day. On running your team, the most important thing you need to do is gather information. You cannot make data without clay. And part of your job as a co-founder or executive comes down to making the right X number of calls a year. When you really look back over it, how many big calls were there really that you had to get right that made a massive decision? I'd say probably that number is like 10, maybe 15. In some cases, it's like some people would say 4, and I think those people are underestimating it. The point is, you can't do that with all the information that you can possibly get. So spend time gathering that information, get around all the filtering mechanisms that you have in place, like reports and stuff like that, which are useful, but get around it by wandering the lab, wander the office, talk to the team, get that raw info feed. It's a sanity check on something that isn't being reported, that could really help a team member with their work. And once you make that call that you've been able to reflect on, it really compounds because you understand something in way more detail. Part of that is simplifying the metrics and objectives. Find the indicators that are as close to the team inputs as possible. Make those and your team's objectives as simple and as clear as possible, and link them, by God, link them to a long-term vision. So link that to a product roadmap, to a customer conversation that you're having, because nothing will kill productivity and morale faster than someone who's working away on a small part of the technology roadmap and doesn't understand where that fits into the larger overall part of the company. At Magdrive, we work in sprints, which is ironic because I know I said it's a marathon, not a sprint. Also, I stole the word from software development because no one else in the team knew what it meant. But that sprint lasts 3 or 4 months, and it has a very defined set of work in it, and it helps us to really all work towards a common goal for those 3-4 months and focus up. All the team is included in that. We all set the objectives together to have that mass scale understanding. And then we run through a master Gantt chart pretty much weekly. As the executive, as the co-founder, you need to make sure your team understands the logical jump from achieving that objective to the larger impact, where it sits in the long-term plan, where the technology fits into the commercial objectives. Let them see that their efforts are part of let them see that their efforts are part of everyone making bank. Like, it sounds almost simplistic to say, but when the Magdrive is actually being sold and sales are coming in and we raise a ridiculous more amount of money, it's not just me and Tom that are going to make bank. Everyone's going to make bank. Having that kind of mentality amongst the team allows you to extend rope to even the most junior people on your team when the downside is low. Always increase their scope to gain task maturity, handle more complex situations in the future, and is a really good way to go forwards. To go to an extreme example about peak performance, if you're working with a team member who wants to grow more, or in the worst case scenario, you're not getting everything you really want out of that team member, ask yourself if that person is capable of doing the work you want them to do if their life depended on it. And this is a question of motivation and capability for that team member. If their life does depend on it and they could do it, then that's on you as a leader for not providing the proper motivation. And you need to solve that. And most of the time, it's due to not providing a larger story as to why their work is important and meaningful, and give it the impact that it should have. Place that work, give it like under the spotlight. Like, without this, we can't do this. If we're not doing that, we're not doing the next step. We're not going to eventually bring our product to the entire industry and completely change the world. If, however, they would be unable to do it even if their life depended on it, then that's also your mistake as a manager and as a leader for expecting them to be able to do it. So figure out in which way you were wrong, because you're going to be wrong, which leads into learning how to delegate, which took me a long time. It took me a really long time to learn how to delegate. You have to make the move from doing everything yourself, and that can be really hard to let go of the reins. On a particular project or decision, eventually, you've got to sort it by the following variables in that little table down there. Your conviction. So do you think you know the right answer, or the best final product, or the best decision to make? And the consequence. If you make the wrong decision, or you make the wrong call, are there catastrophic downsides, to this? If both are low, then you just delegate the project fully. If your conviction is high that you know the perfect solution and you need it done exactly, but someone who's in the team disagrees with you, it's much better to let them go off and do the work they want, as long as the consequences are low to you. That's something you need to build up over time. You need to get comfortable with the idea of giving more and more over. And the team, having made the right hires, will continually show you that that's what they're capable of, which is how I overcame my need to start delegating stuff. How I overcame my inability to delegate initially is watching and being ridiculously impressed by the work everyone else was doing. On the other hand, if the consequences of a decision are really high, you either need to have a really high conviction and overrule someone else within the team, or you need to ask them to go out and gather more information until you've got a high conviction about the decision. You will not and you cannot have 100% conviction or confidence about these types of things. If you really want to put a number on it, then it's probably around 70. But that also makes it a bit weird. You'll have to know yourself. And this is an important part of where giving even the most junior people in the company more rope when the downside is low. That task maturity feeds massively into you as a co-founder or executive being able to let go. Again, this really worked for Magdrive because of the horizontal nature of the company and because of the way that me and Tom have sort of had to take a step back. We can't micromanage everybody, even if we wanted to. The most I can do is work with the mechanical guys, bouncing ideas off them. But what I've never done is tell them how to design something. All I do is ask questions. And on my good days, I ask the right questions. And those, by that I mean I make them consider some part of the design a little more deeply, maybe. Or I inform myself. On a bad day, I either don't have questions, which may just be because they've answered and explained things really well, or it means I'm generally having a bad day and my brain isn't in gear. The only thing you need to do in that case is come back when you are having a good day and just be straight up front about it. I've said, guys, when we spoke yesterday, I'd slept very little and I hadn't had my morning coffee. So would you mind taking me through the design again? And I've never had a no from that, because you come back at it, you look at it again. Also, people like sharing what they work on. I like sharing what I work on with the technical team. I think they like showing me what they're working on. So it all feeds back into itself. This is something I'm going to go through real quick, but it's worth mentioning because you're going to have a lot of meetings. You just got to accept that. Like so many meetings, you're going to spend so much time sat on your ass talking to people, and a lot of the time you're going to be thinking, that could have been an email. Thank you so much for this hour-long meeting. Especially when you end up in a meeting with people who really suck at saying goodbye. Going over the deliverables of that meeting. And then I'll say, yeah, so I'll send you that. Yeah, thanks very much. I'll get that out to you. Yep, great, goodbye. Yep, fantastic. Yep, I'll send you that. Those you can get stuck in a Groundhog Day kind of loop of about 5 minutes where you feel like you just want to pull your own teeth out. Best way to get around that is to identify exactly what kind of meeting you're having in the first place. And there are 4 major types, at least that I can identify. I don't want there to be a 5th one. Frankly, I'm good. One-to-ones. At Magdrive, we do 6 monthly reviews with each team member. So 6 months from when they started, every 6 months. We're open to having them more often, but that's kind of what we agreed with them in the first place. And they're always done for the sake of the team member. They can bring their own items or their own agenda, for example, but it should ideally focus on giving guidance on their performance. Sure, they should be flagging potential problems as soon as possible, but the earlier you know about it, Or the earlier you know about a problem, the more degrees of freedom you have to implement a solution, and the faster you can ultimately respond to. What me and Tom do with the guys is also ask for their feedback. We discuss with them, and we want feedback from them on how me and Tom are doing. First time we've run a company, first time we've been responsible for the livelihood of 10 people, not including ourselves, people who've bought houses, people who are raising kids. Like, oh, God, how do we make sure we're doing the right job? Well, it turns out the people who work with you are the best people to tell you how you're doing the right job. And sometimes they will come out and say, you guys need to communicate this aspect a lot better because it would help them. In which case, more than anything, more than anyone's advice, you take that under like consideration, and the rest of your day becomes building that into how you run your company from then on. Staff meetings are basically a big team meeting with a predefined agenda covering a range of topics, whatever you need, each of which should affect at least two people. Deciding ahead of time how you're going to make that decision. So if you're going to be more democratic with a majority vote rules, just consensus, or is it going to be autocratic, the most senior person making the call? Staff meetings are kind of the most common. They're also the most difficult to set down. A subset of that are decision meetings. So for a good example at Magdrive is deciding what the next prototype is going to be. It's also where we decide what we're going to call it. We name everything after the ship mines from Ian Banks' Culture series. First one was called Fate Amenable to Change. The latest one was called So Much for Subtlety because it was big. And the one we're currently working on now is called Look What You Made Me Do. These are a subset of what should regularly happen in your staff meetings. And when we bring these people together, this is a major decision. It's about what the next prototype should be capable of and how long it's going to take to get there. What it must, should, and should not do, or must not do. And we have always brought the team together to discuss that entire thing and what the final call should be. There is an element here of a slightly autocratic nature, not going to lie, because ultimately me or Tom are the ones whose job it is to place this prototype within the overall roadmap and technological process that we have in mind. So there's always one person in the room that is most senior in that context. And we're the ones who are responsible for things not getting stuck, essentially. We don't have to drive the conversation or even participate in it as long as things are moved along. We're very happy to let 2 or 3 people within the team consider that part of it, and then we can help them make a decision to go forwards. The final one really is operating reviews. This is a very company-to-company thing, but what we like to do at Magdrive is do a weekly hour review. Sharing information, very quick presentation. We fill it with GIFs and we fill it with memes. And just should be a miniature board meeting for little groups. Occur at most once a quarter, but once a week works really nicely. You make decisions by knowledge rather than by position, which is a way better place to be. And also at low level as possible, like what did you do this week? And why was it important? What sucked? A lot of the time people just say, oh, I was testing stuff. And that took a long time. Here are the results. Make it quantitative. Get numbers out of it, which is the best way, again, for you as a co-founder, as an executive, to make really informed decisions, which is the backbone of everything you're going to do for at least 5 years. And that's me. We'll go to question time. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. That's been really insightful. It's covered a lot, and a lot of things that I personally did not expect at all. And I think everybody agrees. And I also saw that the first question that's being asked is, would you be willing to share the PowerPoint? That's up to you entirely if you want to.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. I'll send it to you, and then from there it can be sent out to everybody. I apologize because I do tend to make presentations with minimal content on the screen, and then I just talk. I was never very good at making posters.
Fantastic. So on to questions then. Aaliyah, you've raised your hand. First of all, if you don't want to speak, you can type your question in and I can read it out for you. Aaliyah, have you got a question? Aaliyah, if you're speaking, I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
is the question in the chat?
Hello guys, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, there you are.
My audio setup is quite weird as always. So, Mark, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very inspiring, both from a technical point of view and building a startup point of view. I would have many questions, but I will ask only two for now. One is more technical, one is more on the if you say human resources point of view. So the technical question is, I know you haven't built your final product yet, but if you imagine in the future when you've reached that milestone, how long can you fire your engine for? Because it's very attractive looking at those specs for specific impulse and thrust, and it has the potential to scale up and revolutionize also human space travel from the way you present it. So my question is, how long can you fire your engine for?
The total firing is, to give it on a kind of like the kind of specification sheet that you would look for as a tech lead, kind of choosing a propulsion system, you'd look for the metric called total impulse, which we have at approximately 50,000 Newton seconds, which is to make it the right comparison. The Magdrive is slightly different from what you'd see with the chemical thruster or with a typical electric propulsion, such as the Hall effect, because we draw power in from the onboard solar panels, we store it up, and then it's a combination of high voltage generator and pulse power system. That means that we shunt all that power into the metal propellant in order to ionize it. Each individual pulse builds up a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of power to be deposited. How long it runs as an individual burn relies very much on how much the customer really wants, or the operator really wants to push it, which may reduce the lifetime of the power and things like that. So it's something I really can't give a finite answer on. I have examples, but I'm under NDA with very specific mission types. But in this case, it's much more a question of total impulse. It's a question of thrust per kilogram and specific efficiency, or watts per kilogram is another very important metric to the satellite operators.
Yeah, like watts that you need to operate your system, you mean, not that you produce.
Yeah, okay. How long they want to charge it for, and therefore what the power output they need is.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, how do you measure success and failure, and how do you communicate that to the team?
Ooh. It's hard to measure success because you're creating a roadmap for yourself, with yourself, and with your co-founder. And the best way to do that is to get as much advice from outside as possible. And your success, therefore, comes from meeting and hitting milestones that you've set in place. There are going to be times when you change those milestones, and you need to be very honest with yourself about whether it's because you failed to meet a particular capability, or whether you got there through some sort of, did you take a shortcut? Did you cut some corner out? In some cases, that's okay. It's a startup. You aren't going to do everything perfectly, especially in the space industry. You don't have time to take the NASA route. You've got to be small and scrappy, and sometimes you just literally cannibalize dev kits for a single microchip because no one else is selling them. Success and failure are a constant thing. They're a day-to-day thing. And the reason it's difficult to answer that question, I suppose, is because failures happen every day. You don't get a certain grant. A call you had with somebody ends up being far less informative than you thought. And ultimately, if you have a bad day, that's on you. You really just need to place it in the context of the overall picture that you're aiming for and do better next time. The alternative, if you don't, is just dropping out or not giving everything your all going forwards. So the motivation there really comes from having a long-term vision and putting together the best plan you can. And then you can absorb every failure. It also means absorbing every success. So you rarely get the opportunity to look back and celebrate yourself or the team overall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next we have Samuel. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah, so hi Mark, thank you for the presentation. I think we got a really good insight into how you develop a startup at the beginning of the stage at least. So my question is this, in the initial stages of the startup, it's very hard to develop the trust with your customers, like as to why should that customer take your product instead of some other product which is already developed by your, say, a very well established company. So how do you face that challenge, basically?
Yeah, excellent question. The best way to do that is to let them see under the hood. Let them see why you made the decisions you want to see. One of the big things about in space and making a subcomponent for the space industry is that what we're looking at doing is using non-space rated components, and a large amount of the industry is doing the same thing, because literally, if you've flown something in space and it works, hurrah, congrats, it's space rated now. And the best way to get around that is to let the future customer or user see the maths behind making the decision around that. In our case, let them see our first thrust measurements. Let them see the improved thrust measurements. Let them see how our prototypes improve and why. That's the best way to gain that trust, so they can see that you're really putting the thinking in behind the scenes there. And it's the best way to overcome that. That said, there are still some customers who will not want to accept your product unless it's got a ridiculous amount of flight heritage. Finding those early adopters is a really important part of your market research. For us in the propulsion sector, it's companies who are young themselves, who are in a competitive niche, who really capitalize on the horizontal nature of the space industry, finding new components. They have a high launch cadence, so they can do an in-orbit demonstration with us, which doesn't require an entirely separate launch. We can just sort of stick ourselves on like a starfish. And we're also a great startup, by the way. Have a look at Starfish in the US. So bringing them into seeing the decision-making process on the technical side is really important, and as much as you can without giving away IP.
Just to follow up on that, sorry. But usually sometimes have very sensitive information, so you don't want to give that out very soon.
Yeah, so the best defense you can have is just trade secrets. Patents are, unless you have so much money, even if you can have as much money as God, patents are not a great way to go. Some countries in the world don't give a damn about your patent protection, China, and they will steal what you have, and nothing you can do about it. Tough. So patents are just make all your stuff public. The best thing you can do is have trade secrets. Have a list of stuff that you don't discuss with anybody else outside the company. It's just a blacklist. Even our blacklist is a trade secret. It can get very meta, actually. And track who in the company knows this information. And then when you come to have that conversation with a customer, get an NDA in place. NDAs are only worth as much as the paper they're written on, hence the blacklist. And be very honest with yourself. Is this stopping you from having a meaningful conversation with a customer? Maybe then your blacklist is too heavy. Maybe it's too strict, and you need to loosen up a few aspects of it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Also, moving as fast as you can and just being on the market first is also a huge part. It's not considered an IP strategy, but actually for space, yeah, being first to market, demonstrating as much flight heritage as you can, as fast as you can, is also a great defense.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot for answering the questions.
Thank you.
So we've also got some questions in the chat, so I'll read them out to you. So first summary question. So you're a fan of multi-classing, all right?
Yes. Yeah, always makes for the most interesting D&D characters, absolutely. I've had a fighter who wants to dip into wizard, so I've made an exception for his intelligence stat. That doesn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't play D&D, but yeah, I'm a big fan of multi-classing.
That counts. It's a valid question.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. More like that, please. Actually, less space like questions, more Dungeons and Dragons questions.
Yeah, more Dungeons and Dragons questions, people. So here's another question. Build something, so in quotes, build something people want. How do you know you have a market for your product, i.e. revenue?
Yeah, great question. When we started Magdrive, the original idea was a single-stage to orbit, entirely electric propulsion launch rocket. plasma driven. The math says it checks out, which is cool, except we need magnetic field strength of 40 Tesla to be on until you leave orbit. Obviously, that's insane. That's stupid. So we thought, okay, what's the core competency? Let's scale it way, way down. And we ended up with this current minimum viable product that we're working towards. You have to be blunt, real blunt. Go out and talk to your ideal customers and ask people, is this what you want? In some cases, you can talk to them about their pain points. In some cases, you can just study orbital mechanics and say, yeah, this is actually a magnitude improvement in performance. And you'll get that information from all of those different areas. Talking to advisors within the industry is a huge way to do that because they know from working with customers, putting together missions, they can tell you whether this is a good fit, and they can introduce you to certain companies that will really accelerate that because that tech lead will be able to tell you with that company, yeah, that this is exactly what we want. One of the early examples for us was talking to Planet, and their head of R&D told us that, yeah, you could make them half as good, we'd buy them for twice the price. I was like, great, the plural of anecdote is not data, but great, we'll take that, thank you very much. So every opportunity you can get to talk to customers and find out what's hurting them and why is absolutely the best thing you can do. And be blunt about it, be blunt as hell.
Cool.
And then, I mean, if it doesn't fit, there's a caveat here, if it doesn't fit, then redefine what you're doing. It's a phrase that we got from the Entrepreneur First Accelerator, be married to the solution. Sorry, no, wrong way around, forget what I said. Be married to the problem, not the solution. You're trying to solve a problem here, first and foremost. It may turn out to be that the solution you always had in mind, that you always dreamt of, is entirely unworkable and no one wants it. Tough. Go back to the drawing board, redesign your entire solution, and try and solve the problem first. That's what we ended up doing more than once.
If I ever do that, if I ever get married, I'm never gonna say this marriage is a problem and I'm gonna find a solution to it. Otherwise I'm gonna get divorced. I'll keep that for my work life though. So next question is Michael from Michael Scrater. What made you keep going in periods of doubts?
Oh, I'm motivated by lack of doubt, which sounds like circular logic, I guess. Honestly, working things out with Tom. We just sit down, we put our heads together, we order a pizza, and we work out a solution. The best co-founders that you can work with are people who you can very bluntly bounce those ideas around off and try and find out how to overcome those things. Whether that's financial planning, whether that's a piece of the technology you can't figure out how to solve or how to make work. And sometimes it just comes down to saying, hey, let's experiment and planning how to do those experiments. But the best way to get through that doubt is to remember that you are part of a team. And there's a reason you built out the team of people that are around you. And that includes your advisors. That includes advisors. It includes other people who just happen to be entrepreneurs, even if they're not in the same industry. There are some people you will talk to who will always just leave you feeling like they just did an information dump into your brain, and now you're really, really motivated. And keep coming back to those people. And if they make you feel that way, tell them that, because they'll feel great, and they're much more inclined to do it for you as you go forward. Power of friendship.
Power of friendship. The next question. So, hi Mark, thank you for your presentation. I do have a following quick question. This is from Bando Sabatini. What advice would you give to two buddies looking to create a startup in the space industry, one of whom works in the space industry and the other in the IT and electrical sector?
Oh, cool. Figure out if you're the right people to solve this problem. That's the first thing. I think that's a really good. I think that's the advice we were given. In certain sort of entrepreneurial circles, they call it right to win. Why you? Why are you the guys who should solve this problem? And if you can't answer that, maybe you're focusing on the wrong problem. It's something that me and Tom ran into quite a lot in the early days. Me and Tom actually met because I wanted to start a space startup building satellites in orbit. Turns out that's mad. Like the entire satellite, not just like cool orbit fab, like fuel replenishing. No, I mean the entire satellite with metal sintering and component placement. And basically, the core competency there is gravityless manufacturing, which is anyway. And that's where me and Tom started, and where we kept looking at what problem to solve in the space industry, we eventually came to propulsion because it was a combination of Tom's knowledge of plasma physics and high power electronic engineering and my knowledge of mechanical engineering and my ability to go up to anybody and talk to anybody about anything. That's what kind of led us there. And the reason we knew it was the thing to focus on was because we got so much further with it than any other idea. So you very well could put a year of your time into your first problem that you're trying to solve and eventually realize that it's not the problem you should be focusing on. And it's unfortunate, but it does happen. The key is not to be discouraged and take every lesson you can and try and solve it. Try and find the next problem you want to solve. Pivot. That's what we call a pivot. Some pivots are real painful. Some pivots are very quick and very minor. In some cases, the larger case, I guess they call it a spike, which conjures all kinds of nasty images. But it can happen to anybody. It could even happen to a startup that's been going for 3 years.
Brilliant.
Not an overly comforting answer, I guess, but I mean it's the truth as far as I see it. Sorry.
It's the most important bit. So the next question was, a statement. I joined late and was left confused, thinking this was a D&D presentation. Not saying I'm disappointed. No, nor was I. I was happy to see it. So, hi, thank you for the presentation. Will there be a meeting recording distributed? Unfortunately, made it here halfway through. Yes, we are currently recording it. It should be working. So long as as long as the cloud gods are nice to me, then we will be able to distribute it, and it'll all be fine. The next two are characters from D&D proposed. So that'd be interesting characters.
Oh yeah.
There you go. Okay. Gnome rocket scientist, artificer, and eldritch knight better. So Michael, this is too much fun. Michael has now also said, at which point did you first realize you'd like to make a startup? Was it a calling? Was it a frustration with the current role? I'm interested to know what the tipping point was.
Yeah. The first moment was when I realized I had massive authority issues. That was in high school. I knew I'd be better off as a big fish in a small pond. For sure. Maybe it was because both of my teachers at the time were parents. They're on the call, so I was going to say hi again, Mum and Dad. But I was one of the only kids at school who realized that teachers are just people. They go home, they have lives, they cook dinner, they hang out with you, they talk to you, etc. While most of my classmates still felt on some level that teachers just hide in the cupboard until you come back the next day, which gave me the idea that I don't need to listen to this person all that much, actually. I know you go home and cook dinner for people and go on holidays. Why should I listen to you? Maybe that was it. I don't really know. I'm not a psychologist. But what it did give me was an idea that my time and people I listened to was really important. Especially in the internships that I started doing. One of the really formative ones was I was very fortunate to get an internship at Ford. And what it taught me was that I wanted to innovate as an engineer. I didn't want to manage a production line. I learned a lot about things like Kaizen and Six Sigma. And anybody who's had to do those things in their lifetime will also know that they never want to go back to doing those things, just like me. But what it told me was that I wanted to innovate. And as I started working for startups, I realized that actually I wanted to be in charge there because of how I wanted things, what I wanted the outcome to be. The other thing I saw at that Ford internship was being part of a larger engineering meeting where the manager of the plant was very blunt about how their first responsibility was to shareholders. That sounds like a garbage calling. I want the responsibility to be to changing the world, like those people who lived 2,000 years ago did and were still living with their decisions. So I had to be in control. control issues as well, most likely, kind of an inbuilt thing. I don't know where they come from. But yeah, a combination of frustration with a current role, seeing that my efforts were just going to make the founder wealthy, and I had no shares in the company, so I was just working for a salary, and wanting to turn a vision that I have, which is turning humanity into a spacefaring civilization, my project, which happens to take the form of the company. No individual tipping point, however, but a slow build up towards it, until eventually me and Tom talked to each other in September 2019, and we were just like, oh, let's do it. What's the worst that can happen?
Brilliant, thank you very much. And another one from Michael also afterwards. Do you recommend working in a startup first before building your own startup?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you will see really good practices that you want to implement, and you'll see really bad practices. The first startup I worked at was simultaneously on fire, underwater, and being hit by lightning all at the same time. And I can recognize enough. I saw enough red flags to wave down planes on a runway. So it gave me an idea of how exactly never to run a startup or a company. The second startup I worked at was actually really good. It was run by very smart, motivated people who were actually really inspiring. So yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be first person through the door. It's very different joining a startup as like the first or second person, depending on the company. In Magdrive's case, like the first 10 people are all like kind of on the same level for us. But there are some startups out there where being the first person is like an accolade. It's a really big deal. And you should focus mostly on what the culture of that startup is. Are you going to have a transparent look into what the finances are? Are you going to have a transparent look into how the decisions at the top are made? That's the most important thing to look for.
Fantastic. And last question by Sam. Apologies you went over this. How did you navigate the black hole market, aka government, when you're a startup and don't have a built heritage yet?
Stay away from government. I mean that's pretty generic and sweeping. The issue around that is that government is really hard to sell to, and they will just lather you with contracts and things you can't get out of. All different levels of it. The UK Space Agency is pretty benign, only because it's not really the go-to place for startups in the UK. They do grant outreach and things like that. They organize events. But if you go to the ESA, the European Space Agency, they're a much more bureaucratic institution, and it takes a hell of a lot of you as a startup, to the point where it's probably not even worth going that way. If you're looking at the US and you're looking to selling into the DoD, if you're a component provider like we are, the best route for us, for example, is to sell to the people who sell to government. Companies like Capella, True Anomaly come to mind, for example. They are the people who provide the full satellite to the DoD for almost anything they could ever want. So we should be selling our Magdrive thrusters to them. Meanwhile, meeting people in government through different channels and getting them to talk about Magdrive in an exciting way. In space in particular, commercial entities have really led the charge about what can work and what can happen in space. Even NASA's Technology Demonstrations Directorate now takes its lead from what the private sector is doing. So it sounds flippant, but I wouldn't be too concerned about government itself. And if government is your target market, then that's not a bad thing, but find commercial markets as well, because government's really hard to sell to directly and keep.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So with that, this brings us to the end. If there aren't any more questions, are there any more questions? Or I can't see, is Alan?
Yeah, I don't appear to be able to raise my hand for some reason.
Go for it.
So I feel very technical. Yeah, so thanks for the CEO Bard combo. That hadn't occurred to me before. I will save that D8 for later save versus invoicing. I've got two parts to my question. The first, I think you've kind of covered already, but the challenge of the product market fit that venture capitalists sometimes really like to see before jumping in terms of space, given that you're doing initially fairly single products and you don't have heritage. That whole navigating that whole thing is interesting. Do you have a few words about how you get to TRL 9 when you can't get to TRL 9 before you're in space?
Yeah, you've got to realize the level at which you're pitching it, and when you're doing that kind of seed level fundraise, talking to an investor who understands space is really key. We started off talking to deep tech funds, that kind of thing, but they wanted someone who understood space. And the problem with VCs is that you can't just go tell them to play Kerbal Space Program for half an hour and then get back to you. You can, but they don't like it. So we got very lucky with an introduction to Founders Fund, and we spoke to the two space guys there. They understand orbital mechanics and they understand the space market. What we sold them was me and Tom. We sold them on us and our right to win. And that's what gave them the idea that, yes, we can give them this seed round. When you move past that and go beyond, you want to leverage that previous conversation and demonstrate that you are good financial stewards of their money. Early on, you are selling yourself, not the technology you've already built. I mean, having something you've already built is fantastic because you can demonstrate that, like I said, that first prototype that Tom built in his daughter's bedroom, detonating the first plasma, blew people's minds. To Tom, just another Monday. But that's the important thing to realize. Be showy. Be showy. For sure.
Thank you. The second part, well, it doesn't really sound like a second part. The second question, let's say, then is we've touched on the idea of the naturally heavy workload that full-on commitment to your startup takes. There are some potential pitfalls. So how do you deal within a dynamic team of friends with burnout that can occur sooner or later?
We have an agreement in Magdrive that, bluntly, contractually, we have a working time opt-out clause because you will work more than 40 hours in a week. But no one works on weekends. No work gets done on weekends. You take weekends off. And ultimately, that's the best way to approach it. Me and Tom don't ask more of people than we're willing to do ourselves. Actually, mine and Tom's contracts are exactly the same as the entire team's. Sometimes me and Tom do end up working on weekends, but we do realize that's because we are the founders here and we have an extra responsibility, which is fine. Preventing burnout really is a case of telling each other, you should take a day off. You should, you look like shit. You should take a day. And being able to hear that from your team members, not just a co-founder, is really important as well. Burnout is a hard one to manage, and it's especially difficult when you are potentially isolated from other people you're working with. So having a more constant open line of communication is really important as well. And get that feedback from people outside the immediate organization. Thank you. Just want to say I really like Nate Currier's campaign idea. NASA with a G, the bureaucratic civilization of gnomes trying to make it to the moon in a city-sized spaceship, where the critical path is a project management, it's bad religion in the game. I might shamelessly steal that, but give you full credit. Brilliant.
So if there aren't any more questions, we'll leave it at that. I've put it seems to be issues with the feedback form. I'm not quite sure why, because the permissions should be allowed. So I will try and I'll try and fix that. If that's the case, if people can, I'm going to try and amend that as soon as I can, or copy the link and save it to another point, and I'll try and get that done ASAP. But then we can close up. So one thing I didn't do at the very end, at the very beginning, was introduce what SGAC is and who we are. Space Generation Advisory Council is an international group as a subsection of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Exploration Affairs. So in essence, what we do is we want to connect young professionals across the globe, and we're trying to re-establish a UK presence. The advantage of this, by joining our group, is that you'll have access to an international plethora of young professionals, like-minded, who are interested and passionate about space exploration in a wide area of fields. And there's also an alumni section to the SGAC as well from people who are past 35. So what we'll do is I'll also, if that's the case, I will ping out the survey to your emails, make sure that's fixed. So everybody who's signed up, I can try and send it out, and that way it'll all be sorted. In that case, if there are no more questions, thank you all so much, and thank you, Mark, for agreeing to do this. It's been absolutely amazing listening to you.
It's been a pleasure.
No, it just makes me think about building Lego with you, like just 2 years ago. Oh damn, it's how time's gone. But yeah,
Good times, good times.
And thank you all. Have a great night, and yeah, hopefully see you on for the next one, which will be in another month's time.
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for the questions, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. See you soon.
Bye, Mum.
Thanks so much, and yeah, what a nice group of people you've got for the talk as well. A lot of fun a really fun talk. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Alan. I appreciate it. All right. Good night, everybody.
Brilliant. Thanks again.